what did they have to gain by their testimony? They had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and lose they did. They lost their positions, they lost their livelihoods, they lost their families, they would lose their life for the testimony that they gave. Now, history does have account of men giving their lives for something they think to be so, and they were deceived. And yet they went out and gave their life for something that was false. But it wasn't because they were not sincere. They thought it was right. So certainly the men, demonstrating by the lives that they lived and the things that they suffered for the accounts that they gave, they demonstrated the sincerity in what they were giving. Were they biased? You read the Bible, and the Bible is the most unbiased piece of writing that we have in existence. It's amazing how unbiased it is. You take the greatest heroes of the Bible, Moses, Samuel, David, Peter, and while we hear those names and we think of things that while we adore those men and want to emulate those men, and yet the Bible does not hide their faults from us and explains plainly to us their failings. And Jesus Christ himself. When you read the accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's like reading the account of a newspaper reporter, kind of like the old TV shows. It's just the facts, just the facts. And that's what they do. They let the facts of the life of Christ speak for themselves and do not elaborate on those facts for you to draw your conclusion. They just spell it out and let the facts speak for themselves. It's the most unbiased account that men have ever been a part of. If it's bias is a criteria we want to use, well, how many years following the events were these things recorded? Well, it was within a generation. And some of the events are recorded contemporaneously with when the events occurred. We have the very raw materials of history in the New Testament, and that is those letters that were written. You want to know what was going on at Corinth? And we have letters from Paul to the church at Corinth describing what is going on in the midst of those things happening. And so the time element is there where these things are written even as those events occurred, and if not, within a generation of those events by men who were either witnesses themselves or knew the witnesses, or they're collaborating documents. You know, the Old Testament set forth the idea that at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be confirmed. Well, we do have the witness of Matthew, but we also have the witness of John, that's 2. And we have the witness of Peter, that's 3. And then we have Mark and Luke and Paul. And while they may have known some things directly about Christ, they certainly knew those who did know those things. That's 6. And then you have James and Jude, who were the brothers of our Lord. That's 8. Yes, there's collaborating accounts to the testimony. And we have those collaborating accounts together. And as you look at them, there's differences in those accounts. Now, some people say, oh, there's differences. Okay, the witnesses don't agree. Well, no, it doesn't say they disagree. They just told different things. You study these different accounts, and the very fact that there are differences in those accounts show that this was not a scheme or a plot, or they were purposely trying to defraud, because those differences would not occur in accounts like that. And yet you look at those differences in detail and you find there's no disagreement. They all harmonize. And so unbiased accounts of collaborating witnesses that harmonize together in an undesigned fashion. That's what we have in these books. So you put any history account up to that and see how it compares with how well the Bible does. What about the times? Well, yeah, we know a lot about those times. This was a time at the peak of the Roman Empire, and there were many writers during the period of the Roman Caesars that were writing about things that were happening during those times. Now, some of the latter writings refer to the Christians and the church and back to what they believe and about stories they'd heard about Jesus. But even those that make no mention of that and describe the times, like the offices of the men in the different cities and how Rome governed and what the culture was, those things fit exactly with what we read about in the New Testament. The New Testament is a book that fits into what we read about the times in which they were written, and is then written by people that must have been acquainted with those very times and customs and manners of life. There's a great change occurred in the Roman Empire following the first century. Why, a whole empire of many different peoples, of nationalities and cultures and nations and languages were turned from paganism and started following Jesus. And what caused that? Well, the stories that we read in the New Testament not only describe a reasonable cause, but an adequate cause for that effect to have taken place. And so it matches that bar for historical claim. Now, Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, and his followers claimed he was. Now, that is a remarkable claim. But they present remarkable evidence with that claim. Now, what would it take for someone to claim to be the Son of God before you would believe it? Well, what if they were able to heal the sick and walk on the water and calm the storms and cast out demons and then rise from the dead? Well, it's a remarkable claim. And so it would require remarkable evidence to substantiate and to enable us to have faith in that claim. And is it been account widely distributed? This book has been translated into more languages than any other book that has ever been written. There are just over 1,000 manuscripts, ancient manuscripts of the Old Testament and of the Bible in existence today, from which we draw together to put the text down to give us this book. And there were the discrepancies. There's a few discrepancies, but think, these things are written about 2,000 years ago and hand copied over and over and over. And sure, sometimes somebody'd miss a letter or word along the way. But there are not as many discrepancies in all the pages of this book as there are in the writings of Shakespeare that was only 500 years ago. And so it's been a widely distributed account and widely accepted as the truth for thousands of years. Now, is there any history that can compare to the standards that the Bible meets